Ruffin of the United States Marshal Service and Matthew Stoller of the United States Secret Service. Joining the Chief of Police are also members of the D.C. team, Deputy Mayor Geldhart, Gun Violence Prevention Director Linda Harley Harper, and Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement Director Delano Hunter. I asked the chief to display some of the firepower that MPD is up against out on our streets, and those weapons are on display to my left. They include some of the firearms that were taken out of an apartment on Connecticut Avenue used by a gunman shooting towards a school. Additionally, to my left are include firearms that were taken off the streets just this past weekend by members of the Metropolitan Police Department. Certainly the last weekend and Friday, when talking about a person using an apartment as a sniper's nest, certainly something no mayor wants to have to do. In the police department, however, and all the members of our government and our community know that we're very focused on ridding our city of illegal guns, in some cases legal guns that are purchased only for destruction in our community. I've asked the chief as well to provide an update on additional federal collaboration that is focused on how we are attacking violent crime in every part of the city. He's going to talk to you a little bit more about the Violent Crime Impact Team, and this will be a team established between MPD, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Drug Enforcement Agency. The chief will also be able to provide an update of existing partnerships and how they are helping us deal with violent crime in our city. But the bottom line is we all, the government, the community, law enforcement, violence prevention, everybody who cares about our city and safety in our city has a role to play. I heard a troubling stat last week that guns are now the leading cause of death among America's children. And this is tragic, and this is something as a nation we have to confront. We also know when we talk about violence, sometimes we don't spend a lot of time talking about the victims of violence. And those are people, unfortunately, who may be on the other end of a gun, but they're also people who live in communities where they're fearful or where they've witnessed crime, where they hear gunshots, and where they cannot enjoy the peace and tranquility of their own homes or their own lives. These are the stakes that we're talking about. You will hear me speak passionately about what we need in terms of our entire ecosystem that supports public safety in our city, working together and working urgently. And today we want to provide just the facts, card-hold facts, talk to you about the interventions that we think are working and will work, and talk to you about all of the ways that we will try anything that we think can work. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So with that, I want Robert Conti, who is the Chief of Police for the Metropolitan Police Department, to talk about where we are.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. First, we're going to talk about the shooting that occurred up on Van Ness Street. Fortunately, none of the victims in that case have lost their lives. We know that 2 of these individuals are still in critical condition at area hospitals where they are being treated for their injuries. We continue to ask the community members for their thoughts and prayers for the families of the individuals who were struck by gunfire, but also just for that community as a whole as they went through this experience, and for our city. If you were watching the news coverage of this, you would have seen not only MPD on site, but numerous local and federal partners: FBI, ATF, U.S. Secret Service, U.S. Park Police, U.S. Capitol Police, our D.C. FEMS, HSEMA, just UDC Police, a number of partners that were on the scene. And I just really want to put a pin right there for a moment, because I promise you I'll end the same way that I start, talking about partnership. The reason we were able to amass so many resources to the scene of this very tragic event on Connecticut Avenue is in large part due to the partnerships that we have had with our federal partners, as well as our local partners. The intelligence sharing that took place also enabled us to quickly identify the shooter, now deceased Mr. Raymond Spencer, and prevent additional harm from coming to our community members. Just as a brief recap for everyone, at about 3:18 p.m., this suspect indiscriminately opened fire from the 5th floor apartment window, striking 4 victims in our city. I can tell you that so far out of that apartment, MPD recovered 6 firearms out of that apartment, 4 long guns and 2 handguns out of that location. Of the 4 long guns, 3 of those firearms are fully automatic, were constructed so that they're fully automatic. And we have 4 of those weapons that are on display, actually from the Van Ness Street apartment, that are on display just to the left of the deputy mayor. We know that this person, that Mr. Spencer, in addition to the firearms that we recovered there, he also had an apartment in Fairfax County, Virginia, where we recovered 3 additional constructs of firearms, long guns, long gun rifles. It's the bottom receiver part and other parts of the firearm that was at his location, or at the location in Fairfax County. I can report to you that here in the District of Columbia, we know that in excess of over 200 rounds were fired from this sniper from the apartment on Van Ness Street. We know that 200 rounds were fired, and we know that he had in excess of over 800 rounds, unspent, unshot rounds at his disposal inside of the location at Van Ness. At the apartment in Fairfax County, Virginia, while he had the constructs of 3 additional firearms there, he had thousands of rounds of ammunition at the location in Fairfax County. There are a few things that we know about Mr. Spencer that we did not know then. Again, this is very much an active investigation. We know that Mr. Spencer, that we've seen surveillance footage of him rolling in some suitcase into the Van Ness Street location the prior day, sometime around midnight, sometime around there. We know that Mr. Spencer, it appears that he went to Wheaton High School. He was a lifeguard at some point, and he spent a brief period in the United States Coast Guard back in, I believe it was 2017. He spent a brief period in the U.S. Coast Guard, just a matter of a few months as part of the Coast Guard. We're unsure why he was discharged or what he did, but he was just a brief period with the U.S. Coast Guard. We know that he moved into the apartment in Fairfax County in February of 2021, and that he rented this apartment here in Washington, D.C. in January of 2022. So he had been in that location, at the Van Ness location, for only a couple of months. A lot of people have asked, what is the connection to the school? We have not been able to decipher that. We're looking at his patterns of life. We're looking at what he did immediately before this. We know that 5 hours before the shooting, he went to the Giant on Connecticut Avenue, and he purchased 2 Stouffer's meals, and he went back he took those meals back to his apartment prior to the shooting taking place. There is a lot of information that I'm sure will come to light, and at this point, we're really asking for any additional information that the public may be able to offer us. I'm going to put this number out here, 202-727-9099. If you were to call in with additional information about your interactions with Mr. Spencer over the course of the last year, 18 months, we would ask that you select option 4 when you call that number to call in a tip. We're really trying to understand why this happened. More importantly, we're trying to understand all the different facets of this investigation. Financially, how was he able to purchase these firearms and rent these 2 apartments, et cetera? So there are a lot of things that we need to know that we don't know right now. But I am certain, through collaboration with our community partners as well as with our federal partners, that we will no doubt get to the bottom of this. Again, I want to thank all of the members of the Metropolitan Police Department, all of the members of our federal agencies and local agencies who responded. This was not a one-agency show. The reason why we're able to talk about this now is because of the hard work of the police officers and all the other agencies that were involved in this. I should note that there was a person who was arrested, and I saw some media reports of an individual who was being arrested by members of the Metropolitan Police Department, and they were quite unsure of what that was. That individual was being evacuated out of the building, and police officers, Metropolitan police officers, had enough awareness about them to notice that this person had a satchel across his chest, and that person was armed with a firearm. He was a felon in possession, and those officers, in the midst of dealing with an active shooter scenario, were able to make an arrest of a person who was a felon in possession, who was actually in possession of a firearm during the course of all of this stuff that was happening with this with the active shooter there. So there's a lot of work that went into this, a lot of hard work, a lot of bravery from our officers. You certainly recognize that as these shots were going, this is an automatic fire. We had Metropolitan police officers and other officers running into danger, really not knowing exactly what they're running into. We know that on the 5th floor where this individual was, the apartment where he was, there was a camera set up in the hallway so that he could see approaching officers as they approached the apartment from where he was set up inside of his apartment, inside of the bathroom of the apartment. Again, I am very thankful that we did not lose lives that day. I am thankful that the men and women of law enforcement are safe, and I'm thankful that community members also stepped up to the plate and worked very closely with law enforcement officers to bring about the resolve to this situation. We can come back to Van Ness and talk about Van Ness, but I also want to talk about some of the other things that happened in the District of Columbia over the course of this. Again, when we talk about the Metropolitan Police Department and the demands set upon our officers, while this is going on, we had a triple shooting up on Kennedy Street with 3 residents. 3 residents were injured as a result of a gunman recklessly firing at some citizens in the 600 block of Kennedy Street. That is unacceptable. It is unacceptable behavior. We have distributed to the community, and this is where the community has an opportunity to play a part. We don't think that this individual is a stranger to anyone in the community. In fact, we released his image. While he does have a mask on the lower half of his face, I'm sure that anybody in the community can look at this photo who knows this individual, who knows who he is. I'm asking them to reach out to the Metropolitan Police Department and contact us at 202-727-9099, or you can text us anonymously at 50411. Thankfully, no one lost their life in that case, but I can tell you when I went to Kennedy Street on Saturday and spent several hours up there with members of my family, my son, my mother-in-law, checking in with some of the businesses, talking to residents up there, some of the things that I heard were very disturbing to me. When it comes to just the reckless regard that some people in community have for law-abiding citizens. And I think that that is something that we all can focus on. That is a space where we all can participate, regardless of what your area of discipline is in this ecosystem. We all have a responsibility in this space to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do to hold violent criminals accountable. I should add, with respect to the guy who was arrested for coming out of the apartment building with the firearm, the felon in possession. His case was presented. That individual, probable cause was found. Probable cause was found that our officers made a good case, but unfortunately that individual has been already released back out in community. I think he went to the hospital or something, but those are the kind of things that we're talking about when I talk about accountability in community and making sure that we are all really focused on doing our part. Chief Conte is going to make sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to take violent criminals off the street. In fact, this weekend alone, if you minus out the 6 guns that the sniper had, members of the Metropolitan Police Department recovered 40 illegal firearms in our city just this weekend. That number alone should make every person in this room cringe. 40 illegal firearms. And I assure you that this is as a result of hard work by officers going to get those firearms, because surely nobody just walked up and here are 40 firearms. These are encounters that our police officers had safely had, and there was an incident where we actually had to use a firearm this weekend where we encountered an armed individual who had shot another resident in the 800 block of Crittenden Street. But again, our officers showed up and they did their job on that particular day. Unfortunately, someone lost their life in that. But these are the dangers that our police officers are faced with as we try to tackle this issue of violent crime in our communities. It's about going out here. It's about being brave despite the things that we face, despite the shortages in staffing and all of those things that we talk about. These officers are out here every day, and they're trying to make sure it happens. They're trying to keep the citizens of the District of Columbia safe by making arrests and taking bad guys off the street. That's what we do. Next slide. So there are several other cases that happen, and I'm just going to highlight a few. And as I was, talking to members of my team over the weekend, some of you know I was away. I flew back to get back here just because of some of the issues that we were seeing. And I mean, I wish I could categorize this some other way, other than to just simply say that the level of ridiculousness that we are seeing in some of these instances. There was a man in a wheelchair shot in the 7,000 block of Blair Road. All this, again, is going on while MPD is dealing with the triple shooting, while MPD is also dealing with the sniper on Connecticut Avenue. We have a man shot in a wheelchair on Blair Road. It's reported to us that that man got into some type of argument with 3 young men, and some person decided that the responsible thing to do was to shoot a man in a wheelchair. That is unacceptable anywhere. And I don't know what program we have for that. I don't know what people are expecting to see for that, but people like that deserve to be in jail because they have demonstrated that they cannot function in community. They cannot abide by the community norms that everyone in this room expects to live by. And when we identify people like that, we have to hold those individuals accountable. And what does accountability look like? I ask you that question. What does accountability look like to every person in this room and every person watching this? And are we truly seeing the accountability that we want? And if not, then why not? What does that look like? Who has responsibility for that? I decided a month or 2 months ago, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm going to be responsible for, and I'm going to make sure that I'm doing everything that MPD can do. I can't worry about other parties in this. So many other things. We had a homicide this weekend, 700 block of Morton Street Northwest. There was a birthday party where a resident or a basement of a resident was rented out and rented out by the owner. And at some point, 2 men got into a fight. And of course, the only way to resolve that, a man stabbed and shot an individual to death at a party. Again, I don't know what program we have for that. But some people are not ready to be in community when they commit acts like this that make our communities unsafe. There was another shooting that occurred over on First Sterling Street. There was a guy who was there, a flagger, directing traffic. And traffic is backed up. And surely some people were upset about that. So, of course, a person on a rideshare bike comes up on the rideshare bike and shoots the flagger. Surely that makes sense. Or is that just another level of ridiculousness that we're talking about that we see in community? I'm sure there's a program for that. But again, you get back to how are we holding individuals accountable when they commit these types of violent acts in our community? We expect the police department to lock people up, and we do. And sometimes we lock them up more than one time. I am pleading with our communities and with our city as a whole as we focus on this issue. This is serious business, and people are scared. And when people are scared, we have to take a different approach, a different look in terms of how we're doing the things that we do. Some of the violent crime that I want to talk about really quickly. We went back and we did a look at violent crime going back to 2014, looking up to 2022. And when you talk about overall violent crime, you go back to like 2014. The numbers of violent crimes overall for the last 8 years has actually decreased. But the number of violent crimes in the space of gun crime, since the pandemic, since 2020, those numbers have continued to increase in 2020 as well as in 2021. And that is an area of concern. It's an area of concern for me. It's an area of concern, I'm sure, for many community members. When we look at violent crime across the board, right now in the District of Columbia, we are 263 violent crimes over where we were the same time last year. Now, many of those crimes, when we talk about over, we're talking in the space of robbery, right? That accounts for the majority of those numbers that are over, because our homicide numbers, as of today, MPD is experiencing a 10% reduction as of today. We're at 53 homicides compared to 59 homicides. And while every person in this room has certainly heard me say before, one is one too many in any neighborhood. I don't care where it is. So whether we're talking about 53, 52, 51, those are people at the end of the day. All of those numbers, those are people behind every last one of those numbers. So, I don't get too caught up, we got 5 left, 6 left, whatever, but I certainly know that if we were 7 over or 8 over, whatever, that also would be the story. But that's the real number in terms of where we are as of today. Where crimes are really showing up are in the space, as I mentioned before, of robberies. And that trend started at the very beginning of the year. The interesting thing about this robbery trend, while it did start up very high at the beginning of the year, we're also starting to see that number, the robbery number, trend downward, which is a good thing. We're starting to see the robbery number trend downward a little bit, starting from looking at where we were in January to now. But I can tell you, when you talk about the firearms that are on the street, when you talk about what we're seeing, that number is not letting up. We're already this year 50% over the firearms that we recovered last year. Already, and we're only in the month of April. That's the work of the Metropolitan Police Department right now. We're already 50% over. We're almost at 1,000 firearms recovered this year so far. That is a significant increase in the number of illegal firearms that we're seeing in our city. When you talk about carjackings so far for the year, we've had 165 carjackings. 75% of those carjackings involve somebody armed with a gun. 75% of those cases. If there is any good news that come out of that, is that the MPD has closed by arrest 60 of the 165 carjacking cases, or 36% of the carjacking cases. And when you look at what our closure rate is for robbery, the national average for the closure rate of robbery is about 24%. MPD is at 26% closure rate for robberies. I want them all to be closed, but let's understand really the context in which we're dealing with. When you have somebody that gets robbed and the person has a mask over their face or they have a hood on or something like that, sometimes identifying the person responsible can be very difficult to do. right? So sometimes we're not able to close cases out in those instances where identification is very hard to make. But when you see something like what happened the other day, when we have a 13-year-old that gets charged with, multiple carjackings, multiple armed robberies, that when those kinds of things happen, I mean, he's only one of many other cases in that space where we've had a few individuals charged with committing a whole lot of crime. Very recently, we had two brothers, and that was a very high-profile case where these two brothers were responsible for committing several robberies of establishments in our city. One of the locations you might remember was at Busboy and Poets, where they went in with firearms and everything. These two brothers were arrested, but they also committed carjacking. So I just say in that space that there's a lot of work, a lot of investigative work that's gone into that 26% closure rate for robberies, but there's still a lot more work to be done. I want to update you really quickly on one of the initiatives that we kicked off that we feel it's paying dividends for us, and that's in the space of our homicide reduction partnership. So far, we announced that a few back in the early part of March. Or actually in February leading into March, but overall there's been a 24% decrease in violent crime in the homicide reduction partnership areas, to include a 67% decrease in homicides. So we had 9 homicides in the HRP areas in 2021. In 2022, we're down to 3 homicides in those areas. 6D Sector 3 has had a 26% decrease. 7D Sector 3 has had a 21% decrease. So we are headed in the right direction in our homicide reduction partnership areas, but I want to focus on the word partnership just for a hot second, because what I've seen, and that's part of the reason why we're here today, to talk about partnership, the places that we have had the most success is when we are partnered with our law enforcement partners, partnered with community. In those spaces, we're able to do some incredible things. And when I think back to when we closed out the case involving Mellon and MLK, and when Nia Courtney was murdered, that was a partnership case that really, working with community members, working with our federal partners, that really helped us along the way. When I think about the serial homeless shooter very recently, that was a partnership case where we worked together and we did some great things. We got another great case that's coming up where we're looking at a lot of indictments that we'll be talking about in the very near future, that's as a result of partnership that's happening. When I think about the Maserati guy shooter that we caught over in Costa Rica, all these things happen as a result of partnership. So in a space where we have a workforce that is not at maximum capacity, I think the best thing for us to do going forward is really build on the partnerships that we have. We have a partnership with Prince George's County Police Department as we work on our carjackings, and we have seen an incredible amount of results in that space in terms of these guys really making inroads in a lot of the cases. So we want to build on partnership. So today we have here with us our partners from ATF, DEA, FBI, or FBI is not here right now, but U.S. Marshals are here. We're going to talk about partnership a little bit. I think about the fentanyl overdoses that we had down in Southwest. That case closed, those cases closed, those lives that were lost as a result of who sold those folks fentanyl was closed as a result of partnership, right? Those are important things, and we have to build on that. If the MPD is not at 4,000 or whatever number we feel it should be as a community, if we're not at that number, how do we expand on the partnerships that we have to get the most bang for our buck that's going to have impact in community? And the way that we're going to do that is through our violent crime impact teams. So right now, the violent crime impact teams, and I'll turn the mic over to these guys in a second, but really what we wanted to do, we wanted these individuals sitting side by side with MPD officers. We really kind of already had the model for this, but let's put these guys in a space where, in addition to operating in the homicide reduction partnership areas, but in other areas where we see these acute issues popping up, we have the flexibility to move these individuals around, to focus in on crime, and to do it in spaces where there needs to be an intense focus, or to do it in spaces where there is some leverage for our federal partners that they can kind of bring to the table to help us with these investigations. So I'm going to pause right there and then look down to the table to, I guess we can start with Charlie Patterson, who's the SAC of the Washington Field Office for the ATF, and Charlie can talk about ATF's role in the partnership.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlie Patterson. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the ATF Washington Field Division.
Agent, your microphone, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Charlie Patterson. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the ATF Washington Field Division. Today, I'm here to pledge our full support of this violent crime initiative. We will continue to be in lockstep with the Metropolitan Police Department, our federal partners, and the United States Attorney's Office as we utilize crime, gun, intelligence-led policing to combat federal firearms violations and disrupt violent crime within the district. We stand in unison with you, the community. We hear your requests for assistance with violence. We see the misuse of firearms and constant violent criminal acts. We see how crime has terrorized families, and these acts are just simply unacceptable. ATF is committed to being no better partner and will ensure those that commit illegal firearm crimes are held accountable for their actions. Thank you.
Jarrett Forget, the head of the DEA Washington Field Office.
Thanks, Chief. First, I want to take a moment and thank Mayor Bowser, Chief Conte, MPD, and the other federal partners for being part of this incredible launch. I also want to thank all the media for coming out today and to cover this important topic. You all know that violent crime and overdose deaths in our city are a major concern for families and neighborhoods across the District of Columbia. For many years, DEA Washington has worked together with our law enforcement partners to reduce drug-related violent crime in our communities. However, today, the launch of the DC VSIT, we're doing something very different. The formation and launch of our new VSIT takes our efforts to combat drug-related violence and overdose to a whole new level of effectiveness for DC area residents. Our goal is not to saturate communities with federal law enforcement. Our plan is to work on focused investigations that will make the greatest impact for our neighborhoods here in DC. Our deployment strategies are more targeted than in years prior. Agents, officers, and analysts will be sitting together, working together, and focus on specific areas of the city where they know violence and drug overdoses are occurring. Investigations will be focused on those drug trafficking networks and specific individuals known to be furthering the most violent crimes. With the new VSIT, our enforcement efforts on this problem will be more efficient and impactful, making a real difference for all our city residents, especially those in our hardest hit communities. Along with our work here, it's important to remember that law enforcement alone cannot solve this problem. We need your help. We need the help of all of our residents. The last few years have taught us that effective proactive work like this cannot take place unless our community supports these efforts. Making a real difference in combating the incredible drug overdoses and gun violence we're seeing in this city takes work from all of us. We're here today to stand up and tell you about how we are doing just that, and we're asking for all your help in doing so. We will not tolerate deadly drugs being trafficked on our streets, killing our loved ones, and causing reckless violence near our homes. Our homes and communities should be safe places to live and work for everybody, and this team was created to help with just that. The time has come for us to take back our streets and restore public safety. Thank you.
And next, Lamont Ruffin, United States Marshal Service.
Thank you, Chief Conte. My name is Lamont Ruffin. I'm the acting United States Marshal for the District of Columbia. The Marshal Service is proud to join with our law enforcement partners in a coordinated and partnered response to reduce violent crime through the Violent Crime Impact Team initiative. Every day, our Deputy United States Marshals round up hundreds of fugitives from justice, but this initiative brings a renewed focus on our areas, with our local law enforcement officers where violent crime has surged. We know that by focusing on the most dangerous criminals in our nation, we're able to make a significant reduction in the extreme violence that they facilitate. This violent crime initiative represents how the United States Marshal Service is deeply committed to this city, to our federal local partners, and assisting in reducing violent crime in our nation's capital. As Chief Conte said, enough is enough, and we have to do more. Through our own fugitive investigation, we've recovered 36 firearms from already wanted fugitives, and we have to do more. Thank you for inviting us to this initiative, and we continue with our continued support.
Thank you. and Matt Stoller from the United States Secret Service.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Stoller. I'm the Special Agent in charge for the U.S. Secret Service Washington Field Office. The Washington, D.C. and Greater National Capital Region uniquely bring together law enforcement entities at every level, spanning multiple jurisdictions that routinely work together to ensure security and public safety. The U.S. Secret Service proudly participates in this critical network of partners and works in support of our fellow agencies and entities to reach collective goals, as well as to support each other's agency initiatives. While known for our protective responsibilities, the Secret Service has a long and storied tradition of investigations to help safeguard America's financial and payment systems from criminal exploitation. Over time, our investigative responsibilities have evolved, with a focus on complex transnational investigations into cyber-enabled crimes. Through a nationwide network of cyber fraud task forces, or CFTFs, the Secret Service brings to bear a robust community of investigators, analysts, and cyber experts ready and willing to support public safety at the community level. Today's announcement formalizes an already robust partnership between the Secret Service's Washington Field Office and the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. In addition to routine public safety work, our two agencies enjoy long-standing and unique collaboration through the National Capital Region's Cyber Fraud Task Force. We are eager to leverage CFTF resources and extend our reach in the collective fight to reduce violent crime by supporting the Violent Crimes Impact Team. Nationwide public safety remains of critical importance, and we are privileged to join our esteemed partners in the fight to reduce violent crime here in the nation's capital. Working together and bringing all resources to bear will have a swift and significant impact on the rates of violence in our city, and the Secret Service stands steadfastly among this team in our shared mission to do so. Thank you.
So I want to thank all of my federal partners, again, just for their commitment and contribution. You know, my challenge to them really is to have skin in the game. And that's not just to our federal partners, but that's to community. That's to anybody else who has a vested interest in what happens here in the District of Columbia. These guys have stepped up time and time again for every ask that I have put forth. Normally what happens, it's normally MPD who sends personnel to their federal task forces. And this is a change for them, operating in this space where they have now sent people to be, again, co-located with MPD, working in that space. One slide that I want to just focus on before we get to the Deputy Mayor is the slide where we show the map of where the guns have been recovered in this city by Metropolitan Police Department officers. Do we have that? Can we just go back to that one really quickly? I want members of the community to see that, where the guns are actually being recovered from. And when you look at this map, there's no section of the city that's not been touched. Not one section of our city has not been touched. The only district right now where we have recovered less firearms than we did last year is the first district, 6 less firearms. In the second district, we've recovered 57 more firearms than what we did so far this year as in comparison to last year. 33 more in the third district, 8 more in the fourth district, 111 more firearms in the fifth district, 49 more in the sixth district, and 71 in the seventh district. I have MPD operating on all cylinders to bring about change in our city. And I will continue to ask for the public's help and assistance as we try to bring these violent cases to closure. When we release these images, we need people calling in. You have heard me say time and time again that people respond differently depending on their proximity to the pain. This should be painful for all of us. And it should cause us all to respond differently. We see images of people who have terrorized our community. I want to thank the mayor and the rest of our partners just for an incredible support that they have given to the Metropolitan Police Department to bring about change in our community and reducing violent crime. Yeah.
Thank you, Chief. And I want to thank all the partners as well for always answering the call. I do want to spend a couple of minutes, Chris. We can have an entire briefing also on our non-law enforcement strategies, but I did want to close with a quick summary of those efforts.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so what we're going to go to next. You've heard up here, and you heard the chief mention, the mayor's mentioned many times before. We have a criminal justice, a public safety and justice ecosystem here in the city and everywhere. Every city that you have, there's an ecosystem like this. This is a depiction of what our ecosystem looks like right now. You have a prevention side, which the mayor just mentioned, and we'll talk.